Well, I'm delighted to be here after being stuck in traffic on the Schuylkill behind a tractor-trailer accident, so I never thought I was going to get here, actually. And I'm sorry I missed the presentations by two good friends and extraordinary representatives who have been really powerful allies for us, not only in the Democratic Party, but in the House. And as Larry Frankel said, it's very important to remember that this is a bipartisan effort and that we have to work with people on both sides of the aisle. Steve has been a leader, as I think many of you know, in the hate crimes struggle when we passed that bill, and he has continued to be a leader, and fortunately other people have stepped up as well, and that's why you have Eugene here talking about this bill. But I think it's very important to also look at the context of this legislation in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and to understand what is going on in this country right now with regard to non-discrimination legislation. So before I actually focus on the efforts that we're putting forward to pass this statewide legislation to protect LGBT people on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity or expression in all the areas of our act, which I'll go into in a moment, I do want to take some time to talk to you about a critical moment in history that we are facing with the Employment Non-Discrimination Act in Congress, and it directly relates to the work that we're doing here in this state. We have 1 week, a window of opportunity to get an inclusive Employment Non-Discrimination Act passed because limitations have been placed on us in Congress by the leadership in the Democratic Party, which has been generally very friendly to our cause, but unfortunately in what we believe was not a thoughtful and thorough vote count, a whip count that was done. The determination was made inside the leadership in the party that there were not enough votes in Congress to be able to pass an inclusive bill. And so the strategy through someone who has been a hero to the LGBT community, Congressman Barney Frank, but unfortunately on this particular tactical maneuver, we strongly disagree with the assessment that's been made. The decision's been made to split the bill into 2 separate bills and to move forward with a non-discrimination bill that only will include sexual orientation. Now, everyone is advocating for an inclusive ENDA at the moment, including Barney Frank. But it is a very dangerous time because we are about to see one part of our community left behind. And that's a decision that we have firmly made in this state, that we will not proceed with legislation that is not fully inclusive. We are concerned, as many other states around the country are who do not yet enjoy statewide protections, that if this strategy succeeds in Congress and we are not able to delay a vote on an inclusive ENDA for some weeks or some months until we are able to secure the necessary congressional members who will vote for an inclusive bill, we are concerned that it will have some impact potentially here in the state and in other states across the country with regard to those who may be less certain with their support, or who may be wavering on a particular portion of the bill, or who may just simply want to use this as an excuse because this is considered controversial legislation. And we are encouraging everyone with whom we speak to please, in addition to supporting our statewide bill, to make sure that in the next day you contact by phone or by letter Barney Frank's office and indicate your strong support for only inclusive legislation with regard to the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, and actually any federal legislation that affects the sexual minority community. We're also concerned about several aspects of this bill which directly relate to our statewide legislation. The first is that gender identity expression protections are directly related to protections for lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. Because in fact, the complaints that we get at the Human Relations Commission, we have actually been tracking complaints that we have not been able to investigate and open full cases on because it's not yet in our statewide statute. Those complaints generally are about accusations or allegations of discrimination that are based upon people not conforming to gender stereotypes in the workplace or with regard to housing or service in public accommodations. That is, people do not necessarily know what your sexual orientation is unless you actually reveal it to them. Most people have no idea whether somebody is gay, straight, bisexual, or transgender. What they do know is how that person expresses themselves in clothing, in hair, in dress, in gesture, in speech. And those gender triggers or markers are the things which actually cause levels of response in people who are willing to discriminate. So people are making a perceived judgment about someone's orientation when actually what they're basing it upon is their gender expression. So we feel it's very important to have both of these protections in the statewide statute and in federal legislation, because in fact, many straight people who are non-conforming, effeminate men or masculine women who are heterosexual will not be covered if gender identity expression is not in this legislation. And many LGBT people who are gender conforming, men who are very masculine, women who are extremely feminine, they will be discriminated against, not necessarily because of their sexual orientation, and they too will be subject to other kinds of discrimination that won't be protected if you don't have both classes in this law. The other area we're very concerned about in federal legislation, and I won't spend too much time on this, and I also won't spend time on it in the state statute because we actually have better protections, not perfect protections, but better protections with regard to the religious exemption in our state statute. But in the new version of the Federal Employment Non-Discrimination Act, they have now reverted to old language from 12 years ago, which is a broad-based religious exemption, which means that no LGBT person would be covered if they were in employment in any religiously affiliated organization. You could be a janitor working for the Salvation Army and you would not be covered. In other words, it used to be a ministerial exception in the religious exemption language. Now it's been broadened to include everything. And we feel that that is very damaging to this legislation and really opens up a very broad opportunity for those who would discriminate to act out against LGBT people in ways that could really marginalize the effectiveness of this legislation on the federal level. And we also don't want to see that prop up on a statewide level, because the last thing we want is an amendment to the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, which would weaken the religious exemption that we have. Now, the ACLU, People from American Way, Americans United, and many other groups that are part of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights have all strenuously objected to the way the religious exemption language has been written and have been speaking up very loudly. But I wanted to make it clear because here we are in a UU church in a place where people are very mindful of exactly what this kind of religious exemption means and who are very concerned about the kinds of protections that would apply to people based upon what you would encounter in any kind of a religiously affiliated organization. This includes all the groups that receive faith-based money from the federal government. So you realize how broad this discrimination could still be, even with an ENDA in place, if this language is not changed.